They're actually telling people you're wrong when you think it feels this bad. You're just wrong. That's not the case. Look at the numbers. We're doing great. Bidenomics is fantastic.
Well, of course, it's a presidential election year, and if James Carville is right, every presidential election boils down to the economy. Stupid. And if that's the case, well, this week, the Biden administration and the campaign looking for re-election, they didn't get very good news. Here's how Rick Santelli delivered it on CNBC.
Now let's get to the money numbers. GDP, first look, first quarter, a disappointment, 1.6%. You're looking for a number almost a full percentage point higher. 1.6, the weakest growth on a quarterly basis going back to the second quarter of 22 when it was negative, minus 0.6%. Consumption, 0.5% weaker than expected at 2.5%. 2.5% would be the weakest since second quarter of last year.
He kept comparing it to these other worse numbers, which all happened to fall in the Biden administration as well. Coupled with the fact that inflation numbers in February and March were not good, no interest rate reductions as people were hoping for. Akash, we'll start with you. We're basically in Jimmy Carter land right now. They're using the word stagflation, which I haven't heard since then.
No, that's right, Larry. And here's the thing. The American people, they don't assess the economy with month-to-month numbers. They look at the entirety of the Biden presidency and his track record. And since he took office, prices are up almost 20%. And so inflation remains a huge problem. It's going to continue to be the case because things are a lot more expensive than they were when he took office, and wages have not kept pace. How has President Biden responded, mind you? Let's look at the last 2 weeks. He proposed rolling back the entirety of the Trump tax cuts, including on the middle class. That's a $2 trillion tax increase. He wants to raise the corporate tax. He wants to raise taxes on investment income. These are going to be an enormous wet blanket on economic growth. And yet at the same time, he wants to grow government, dish out corporate welfare. This is going to be more of the same: inflation, special interest driven governing that the rest of us have to pay for.
Yeah, and Akash, not only did he say that he'll allow the Trump tax cuts of 2017 to sunset, which they are supposed to do in 2026, he bragged about it. I mean, that was part of his stump speech that he was delivering. I don't see how that, what is this, Walter Mondale time again? Andy, if you're on a fixed income, which a lot of the members of AMAC are, this continues to be bad news. I mean, horrible news.
Absolutely right. People are struggling right now. Most of our members are retired. A lot of them aren't. But those living on a fixed income, they're living the reality of Bidenomics: high gas prices, high grocery bills. They're struggling to pay for medical expenses and pay for medication. For those who aren't working, they're struggling to save for retirement. They're struggling to buy a home. They're struggling to they find themselves in credit card debt just to try and maintain a decent standard of living because of inflation. And if they're not able to cut rates, then there's going to be very little for Biden to hang his hat on as we roll toward the general election.
Yeah, and Beverly, this is also hurting families, millennials who would like to buy a home. They can't afford to still, which used to be sort of the regular sort of move into the middle class or upper middle class. If you reached into your 30s and you were married and starting a family, it's unattainable right now. And I think people are putting the pieces together and saying, yeah, it's because of these policies over the last few years.
Well, I think it's so funny that the Biden administration continues to talk about the economy doing well and trying to spin this. You can't spin people's reality. People know what's going on.
If I may, that is such a great point, because they have one of two choices.
Yeah.
They can either blame it on Trump and COVID, or they can just say, you guys are nuts. Everything's great. And shockingly, they've chosen the latter. Don't believe your eyes. Don't believe your checkbook. Don't believe your monthly budget. Everything's great, Beverly.
I mean, yeah, think about this. They're actually telling people you're wrong when you think it feels this bad. You're just wrong. That's not the case. Look at the numbers. We're doing great. Bidenomics is fantastic. And I think that's where people just feel gaslit all over the place and why it's not working for them. I actually think a better message would be to say, look, COVID was hard. We're trying to get out of it. Here's what we're doing to try to improve things. Talk about this more being the struggle, but you're the fighter who's trying to help navigate it. That to me would be the better angle. And just to talk about what you were saying with millennials or young people trying to buy homes, the interest rates are a huge problem for people trying to enter in the housing market. And also this, more people are using credit cards than ever before because they can't pay for things based on their paycheck. That interest rate is a big deal when it comes to credit card debt. Again, the housing market itself. But the Biden administration, while they want to lower it, they know that's going to impact inflation. If they lower it too much, too drastically, they're in a tough position, and telling people that the reality is not true is not the answer.
Yeah, and Akash, Janet Yellen, the Treasury Secretary, sort of burst the bubble of the Biden campaign's "everything is fine" here. Speaking with Reuters this week, she acknowledged exactly what the problem is.
I know that Americans are concerned with the high cost of living in a number of different areas, and it's President Biden's top priority to address that concern.
It doesn't seem like it's his top priority, especially with all of the things that you've already noted that they're trying to roll back and change and actually make matters worse. I mean, AFP is your organization. The P stands for prosperity, and that is out of reach right now, it seems.
Absolutely. In fact, Beverly noted that they're running on Bidenomics. They can't really decide if they're running on Bidenomics or not. AFP actually owns Bidenomics.com because the White House and the DNC and the Biden campaign chose not to do so. We bought Bidenomics.com, turned it into a fact-checking rhetoric versus reality website where people can see what has President Biden actually claimed about energy and spending and jobs and all these other economic indicators versus what is the reality. And so I think, as Beverly noted, they're kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place because you can't argue with people's reality. Things are expensive. Things are not getting easier or better for the American people. And it's not only making their day-to-day lives more expensive, more difficult, but as we noted, it's putting the American dream out of reach for people who want to get there, right? Who want to buy a bigger home, who want to buy a new car. And I'm sure it's going to have all kinds of other social consequences, people choosing not to have kids or waiting to have kids or things like that. And so the consequences are really, really drastic. And I think running against Bidenomics and getting back to basic free market fundamentals, which is what AFP has been doing and will be holding people accountable for all year, really is the recipe for success.
It does. It has societal and cultural ramifications. And I'd forgotten you guys bought Bidenomics.com. I think that's hilarious. Andy, this, members of AMAC, they're hoping to be grandparents. They want their kids to have children. And there are literally decisions being made about having a baby right now because it is so bad. And let me just say, it's not just that it's bad, but there doesn't seem to be any progress toward making it better, except for Election Day.
Exactly right. And, people putting their lives on hold because of Bidenomics is tragic. And what's even more insulting is the media is doing the bidding for the Biden administration and blaming Americans for not recognizing how glorious this economy is supposed to be. It's insulting. And it's something that the media is, they're willing accomplices in this matter. But, and I just wanted to mention, who doesn't love grandchildren? Okay. And who does, but, we don't want to see our kids struggle. And that's what's happening right now in this economy.
Akash, let me just swing it right back to you and we'll go around the horn because, again, I want to keep reiterating, you can point to palpable decisions this administration is making and draw a straight line. And it's all being done through the bureaucracy. It's not being legislated. Here's an example. All of the mandates on electric vehicles and all of the whole agenda of the Energy Department, Ford announced this week they lost $130,000 on each electric vehicle it sold. If they actually successfully sold it, it was a loss of $130,000. And yes, they took a bunch of incentives from the federal government, which added to inflation, but it doesn't help anything. You add to that their decision this week to try to unilaterally remove non-compete clauses and make them illegal. Again, that's something that should be voted on. And Beverly, I know you at Independent Women's Forum, you guys are all over their attempt to basically end independent contracting as we know it. And I want to go around the horn here, starting with Akash. It's this kind of insidious regulatory bureaucracy by unelected officials that's contributing and really creating this problem. This is where Congress could step in, couldn't they?
Absolutely. Janet Yellen says the cost of living is President Biden's #1 priority. It certainly seems like forcing Americans to buy union-made electric vehicles is the administration's #1 priority.
Yes.
What they did is when they controlled Congress, they pushed through $6 trillion in additional spending to drive up inflation. Now, as you noted, without full control of Congress, they're doing it through the administrative state, way overstepping the bounds of their authority. And you are seeing Republicans in Congress step up. They've passed a number of what are called Congressional Review Act resolutions to roll back regulations. Of course, President Biden is not signing those into law, but you're seeing real leadership from Speaker Johnson and others in Congress, making members of Congress accountable for things that Congress should be deciding ultimately, not the president through executive authority.
Beverly?
Yeah, and I think the independent contractor angle is such an important one because so many people are independent contractors out there. When you mess with their livelihood or their side hustle, it does make a difference. And I think especially for women, so many women want to be there with their kids, but also want to have this side job. And then government comes in, whether it's through state or federal means, and changes that up and they say to them, well, you need to have benefits. And they're like, I don't need benefits. I get that through my husband, or that's not what I signed up for. And it changes the terms of their work. When you mess with people and their livelihoods, what's going on, people do have a big issue with it. And here's what I think is going to be interesting about the economy. We already know how both presidents, these both two candidates, former President Trump and President Biden, will act as president. We have the economy to measure. And that's what the Biden administration can't do, is try to spin a narrative to say what they would be versus Trump. People already know.